Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It's myself, George, joined once more by Tayte and Ayman for a very special review. This is our spoiler discussion on House of the Dragon Season 1, which has finished as of this morning at 3 a.m. And it's been one hell of a season, and we are here to talk about it. And before we get into anything, there's a lot of fireworks going on tonight. It's Diwali. Happy Diwali to those that celebrate. But just in case you can hear explosions, I'm not on a war front. I'm just there's just a lot of noise. So before we start to get into things, how is everybody doing today?
Yeah, good. Really intrigued to get into discussing this series because there was an awful lot of kind of hype going into it, with it playing off against Rings of Power, and it would be very interesting to see where we kind of balance up this series up against that one.
Yeah, definitely. Ayman?
Yeah, same. I mean, yeah, I can't complain. I'm good. Yeah, it's really interesting. House of Dragons airing at the same time as Rings of Power, and choosing which one worked the best, essentially. Especially this one being a prequel to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, there's a good point. They're both prequels. Remember, I mean, I'm going to be blunt. I don't think it's a competition. I don't need to.
It's not.
I don't want to sort of crap on one and not the other, but I think they're both two complete. Although they're fancy, they're both two completely different shows, which is worth mentioning. But yes, it's very weird having Game of Thrones and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings all on airing weekly at the same time, which is very strange. There's a Marvel She-Hulk because there's a lot of TV at the moment, and I think this is the one that's absolutely stole it for me. Sold all the shows. But before we get into that sort of stuff, we want to hear from you in the comments below. So please do comment below your thoughts on House of the Dragon. Now, as I said, this is a spoiler discussion on season 1. You talk about anything that happened, anything you've seen that's happened. We're going to ask you to do one thing. If you've read ahead, if you've read all of Fire and Blood, I've got a copy here. If you know what's happening and what isn't happening, try not to comment stuff that may be spoilers for future seasons. You won't be ruining it for me. I know what happens. So if there's anyone with weird guilt, grief, then you just go for it. I'm not going to bring the comments up. But obviously, just take into account that other people watching this. So yeah, anything off the table, just talk season 1. And obviously Game of Thrones as well. We can talk about Game of Thrones. So please do get involved. And if you like this video, please consider that like button and subscribe. Obviously, there's going to be more seasons of this. It's going to start filming next year, so Game of Thrones isn't going anytime soon. A lot of things happening, so there's a lot of stuff to subscribe to check out for. And we appreciate anyone that just take the time out to stick with us and watch these videos. And as well, where can the people find us for what is coming up and what isn't coming up?
The people can find us absolutely everywhere. So if you go follow us on Twitter and Instagram, that is where we are most active. That's where you'll find out about most of our videos coming up. Go and follow us at cinema_savvy. Go and find us on Facebook and letterboxd.com. Just type in Cinema Savvy. The link is in the description as well. And go find us on Redbubble, where you can help support the channel with a t-shirt, a cap, whatever you want.
Definitely. So everybody, please do that. And what we'll kickstart with. So we have a schedule of kinds. So the big background, when we used to do Game of Thrones at the very early days of the channel, I think me and Tate were chatting earlier, we did weekly reviews on season 6, 7, and 8. Obviously, this wasn't the case for House of Dragon. It was about 2 episodes. Like, oh man, like we really should have. But there's been so much happening. Again, like Lord of the Rings, we just couldn't fit it in. There's so many things happening at the moment. So what we're going to have this done in a very different way, this schedule. So we used to do it geographically. The storyline at the north would work our way down south towards King's Landing. Because this is a lot easier, this is the story of one house, essentially 2 really locations if you really want to get into it. We're going to go through this based off characters / allegiances. So we've got Viserys / the throne, the blacks, the greens, and we'll go through some of the key characters and talk about the season through those characters rather than us directly going into events. And hopefully within that, we do cover most of the ground. But before we kickstart it, I want to, just so we can get a chance to get people a bit more familiar, Ayman, I just curiously quickly know your thoughts on Game of Thrones, not House Dragon. Yeah, how Game of Thrones has been, your background with it.
Yeah, Game of Thrones was one of those that I think it was one of the first shows that I watched weekly, like religiously. Every time they'd be on, I'd be watching it in my lounge, lights off, complete darkness, and throughout the first 6 seasons, it was great. 7th season wasn't too bad, and then we got the infamous final season, which was okay in parts when you could see it, when it wasn't lighting wasn't a weird thing. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it as a whole. It's not a show that I can go back and watch now because the final season ruined it for me, unfortunately. But I'd enjoy it if it's on. I watch it.
Tate?
So Game of Thrones was the biggest show of its time. And even if it has a terrible final season, I think people can still find solace in the fact that it really upped the game for the fantasy genre in that aspect. People were flocking to the show who had never wanted to be a part of fantasy before, in a similar way to the original kind of Lord of the Rings films doing the same thing for the genre back in the day. It was high budget TV that made you feel like you're in the movies, and it was a fantastic story. Sadly, the writers really did drop off as soon as they ran out of book material. And as soon as they were left to their own devices, that's where the show started to plummet. And we could talk about Benioff and Weiss as much as we wanted to, because they, abandoned the final series of Game of Thrones so they could get onto Star Wars, only to get cancelled off Star Wars because of how bad the final series of Game of Thrones was. That's the story there. We move on from that. So coming into this series, knowing that it was kind of some of the better members of the team, should we say, getting involved, like Mikhail Sapoknik and Ryan J. Condal. Like, yeah, it was kind of the best parts that were left over from the ashes to kind of take it over. So I don't think anyone was really expecting it to be this good from the off. I think a lot of people were expecting it to be kind of season 5, season 6 Game of Thrones. So some really good moments dashed in with, some really terrible kind of, acting and moments and just writing and stuff like that. But I mean, if we're just kind of going in it straight off the off, like from the first trailer all the way through to now, they absolutely nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. This is kind of peak level that Game of Thrones got to. Levels of storytelling, of acting, of writing across the board. And I think it's a fantastic series, and I'm intrigued to see kind of where they go from here. Of course, it's kind of ish written in the books already, but I guess we'll talk about that in a bit as well. But no, like there was so much hype heading into it, and off the back of Game of Thrones, the fans weren't really expecting much, and they got given an awful lot.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, Game of Thrones, I remember, and it always sounds like it's a conversation it's not meant to be, but I remember jumping on board with season 2, like season 1 had aired, and I can remember adverts for season 1 because I think Sky Atlantic was new back then over here, and we were in year 11. I just remember adverts everywhere. And then when the background for me was when I was in college, one of my friends knew Sophie Turner, so there was conversations. I didn't know who Sophie Turner was, but it was these awkward conversations of at the time, you're 16, they've just had a season 2, and it's like, yeah, this person, like, she's from around the corner, she lives near us. And it was a very weird way. So I got into Game of Thrones through some side stuff. And I remember really, I enjoyed it season 1 and 2, but it really gripped me in season 3. That's when it became weekly. That's when I started telling people, come watch the show. And obviously, as we said, it's grown to one of the biggest shows ever. And so kind of what you said there, Tate, high budget TV. It's not just fantasy. Like this has reinvigorated the entirety of an industry. Stuff like we've got Star Wars, we've got Marvel. I don't think any of that's near possible without Game of Thrones being the show that was doing $30 million episodes and stuff like that. So it's been incredible seeing its popularity. And, that final season, I know it's got a few people that don't mind it, but, the drop off the quality, the book's not being finished. So many variables go into that. And if I'm being blunt, heading into House of Dragon, I think, Ayman, you're on the San Diego video. We had a trailer and I was like, I just don't care for this. I was so depleted of Thrones. And it was only until a fair few people I know got press screenings for the first 6 episodes. Well, not screenings, like online screeners. And for HBO to give out 6/10 of a season a month early showed that either this is very good and they're confident, or they need people talking and discussing it. And what did it for me was when the first episode aired, there was a video going around on Twitter. I don't know if anyone saw it, of a block in New York, and every single TV and lighting was changing in sync with each other because that was the hundreds of people watching Game of Thrones in America. And it's been amazing to sort of not revisit Westeros because we're in a new era and a new time. But there's something that's been lovely about it. And I think the most important thing for me is that this has an ending as such. We know it's been written. We know it. I guess it's a prequel, but we know where it's going to head. Well, I do. Not everyone will, but I think that's a big thing for me to get invested now. Is that okay? Is it going to be 4 seasons, or is it 4 seasons of Dance of Dragons? That's fine with me, because at least we know that we're not going to jump off a cliff and have people trying to finish something that hadn't been written. So that was a big thing for me. And just my overall thoughts on the series, I think it's been the best show I've seen this year, if I'm being honest. I am so back into the Westeros vibe. I've been on YouTube loads. Just, it's a bit sad, but I always love watching clips of just Tywin Lannister just sitting down and talking with people. And again, right, it's always those early seasons where everything was just written so well. If it's Tyrion, if it's Tywin, all of them. You know, Robert Baratheon, the meme culture took over. They call him Bobby B now. There's so much happening. It's kind of great, and it's kind of a shame because I don't want to harp on that last final season of Game of Thrones. But you know, contextually at the time, I remember it. I was at my old job. I was watching these episodes at 2 a.m, finishing at 3, and I was getting up at 6 to drive down to Pinewood, like an hour and a half way, and just having that disappointment every Monday for about 6 weeks was just torturous. But yeah, so we are here talking House of the Dragon. So we're going to move into politer terms. So where we'll kickstart, we're going to kickstart with the throne. So obviously this is a prequel series. It's a spoiler discussion. I don't need to tell you who sits on the throne to begin with. Obviously Viserys the First, played by the legendary Paddy Considine, an actor who is finally getting the credit that if you're familiar with his work, that you will see he rightfully should have had for many a year. And I just want to talk about his character first, because we're going to separate off into the blacks and the greens. Everything stems from him. But I'm just going to say this is the best performance of the season by a country mile. For an actor who I don't think is a household name. I think some people will certainly recognize him off certain comedies maybe, or if they have seen some of his, I think Peaky Blinders is something more recent, a few people to cinnamon, but I was really, in a cool way, I was like, Paddy Considine, that's not who I would have imagined being Game of Thrones, but he fits. He fits Game of Thrones, and he's the most endearing character of the show. A terrible king, yes, but a wonderful father, a man that's lived however many decades of his life in shame that he'd made a terrible choice, and, you know, and has a life full of regret. He didn't love any of his children that came and followed Rhaenyra. I just want to say I didn't expect to have such a well fleshed out character in a supporting role who really doesn't just hold this show together. He holds Westeros and the throne together. And I just wanted to say that outright, that he's just unbelievable to the point of when we have the episode in episode 8, the walk. I'm trying to think of a time in my life I've ever seen a character walk up some steps and it'd be as like emotionally impactful as this was. It just goes to show what he's been able to do in those first 8 episodes that led to that moment. And, you know, his final flaw was misreading. Well, he just didn't realize that it wasn't Rhaenyra sat in bed with him, was it? It was Alicent Hightower.
Well, I just want to kind of start by going in, and I know we're not really meant to be talking about the books and stuff like that, but George R. R. Martin, who kind of wrote the books and wrote the entire universe, said that this was the better version of the character, and said that he would happily rewrite the character for this to be the actual version. What Paddy Considine did was he gave the character flaws, he gave the character humanity. He is a man who just wants his family to be together. There's no ulterior motive there. He has chosen what he thinks is best for the realm. And I mean, you could go into lore and say, well, he keeps on cutting himself on the throne. It's what killed him in the end because of the bad decisions that he was making. But he was a family man. He was the man who was out there to really unite his family instead of uniting the realm. And sure, it did fail in the end. But as far as a character is concerned, the way he played it, the way he was almost aggressive to the point of keeping like those threads of the family together and kind of not really taking notice of, you know, the bastardization of his grandkids or anything like that, because he loved his family too much to care about stuff like that. And like you said, when he does the walk, and I'm sure he'll win an Emmy for it, he will absolutely win an Emmy for it. I think it's already kind of not written in stone, but like everyone's already saying, oh yeah, just that scene alone of him walking towards a chair, phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Like I was sat there watching it just gobsmacked and just I was welling up. I was getting emotional about it. And I don't think a TV show's done that to me in that same way in a very long time. To see his character, where he started at the start of the series, as kind of a king who was very ruling, and then towards the end, who was just really only cared about his family, even in his dying breath. Like, it was really, really, really good as far as performance. It wasn't expected, but there you go. I mean, Game of Thrones before it brought out brilliant acting performances from kind of lifetime British. Well, they had Tyrion as well, but a lot of British actors and actresses being able to kind of, show off their acting skills within their role. And House of the Dragon has done pretty much the same for, this kind of new generation of people coming through with it and giving a shining light to not only long-standing actors in the game, but also newcomers to it as well.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, yeah, you both mentioned episode 8 with the walk. I mean, when there's not many shows or scenes or shows that like make me like gasp out loud, but when the doors flung open and like he was there and he was walking, it was an audible gasp for me. Like, he did it. He played Viserys so well because he was kingly when he needed to be, but he was a family man when he needed to be. No matter what fault Rhaenyra did, he always had her back, regardless of what was happening. Even turning a blind eye to her bastard kids, like I think on some sort of level, he knew that they were bastard kids, but he didn't care. It was him trying to keep the family together because he knew that if the family splits and there's problems in the family, that will ripple out throughout the whole of Westeros. But yeah, I mean, in his last episode, which was episode 8, like even the scenes at the dinner where you get shots where he's just looking at the rest of his family, like looking at Daemon, looking at Rhaenyra, and he's content that everyone is happy and having a good time. And yeah, it was just a phenomenal performance by Paddy Considine.
Yeah, and kind of that table scene, there's some, and this is kind of what I missed with some high-end TV, that as much as I love my Kenobis and my Star Wars stuff, so much of Rings of Power has just been people jumping on bandwagons for easy likes and clicks and abusive stuff. And some people obviously like it, some don't. I'm not very fussed, but you're not having, unless you find the right channels. I'm just giving a shout out to Castley Talk, Alden, who's been on this channel before, run by Ken Knopsop as well. They've absolutely smashed it with weekly discussions on this show, which has been amazing to listen to. And obviously, they've got a firm understanding of the books, but they're not jumping that book knowledge in there. They're talking about the themes and the meanings of it. And an amazing discussion that's took place online is that dinner scene. As I always joke, like, at film school, like when you're younger and you're studying, they're like, "Oh yeah, look at this. This means that. That means this," and it's all very up itself. But there's this amazing thing that the damaged half of his face was where the greens were all sat, and the visible half was the blacks. Now, I think that's a coincidence, or is it coincidence? I don't know, but I just miss those like thought-provoking stuff. And it's not a theory. It's not, I'm planning this. It's just observations in a show like this. And I just think George R. R. Martin has been an easy person to jump on because he's not finished Game of Thrones. But I'm probably 150 pages into Fire and Blood, and I've not read a book like it. Like, yes, it's based off opinions and it's recounting events, and it's almost essentially a fictional history book. But for me, I'm just sat there like, this isn't like someone that's just like made Game of Thrones. He has written a fictional history stemming hundreds of years. And the stories in this also go in the Game of Thrones books as well. So somewhere at home, I can understand how slow he is at writing because it's so specific, his writing skills. And I think when the showrunners come to House of Dragon, they know who the houses are, they know who's in power, they know what's happening. George R. R. Martin has his own versions, and I think what's very important is that it's been very hard to find how involved he is. So obviously Game of Thrones season 1 to 4, I believe he was co-writing episodes as well. Now, I don't think he has a co-writing credit directly, episode by episode, on this. However, I do believe he is involved within this production. I know he'd seen the whole season early. He'd spoke about it, and I don't think he was pushing it for the sake of PR. There's some amazing YouTube videos of him talking about Westeros currently and him giving the story of where they're at in the world. But I just think that this shows in great depth to the writing and what he's been able to plan out, and the showrunners that have come on board. Certainly, I mean, a lot of them had a view to take that worked on Game of Thrones previously. Some of the best parts of Game of Thrones was the episodes these guys worked on, and it's an amazing thing that they were able to then get the showrunning credit. I'm not going to jump on Benioff and Weiss. They did an incredible job for a long amount of time. Unfortunately, they didn't nail the landing, and that's something that's always going to be eternally remembered, to the point we're getting a Jon Snow series, which is clearly an apology piece by, George R. R. Martin said it. He didn't want to do a Jon Snow series. Kit Harington pitched it to him. He's like, yeah, let's go for it. So, it's very tricky. It's very tricky to move on past Game of Thrones. And even with the series, actually, one thing I want to kind of end on is something that isn't in these books that's an amazing story, which clearly comes from George R. R. Martin. The whole purpose of what I believe Aegon's conquest is that he has had the dream about the White Walkers, a song of ice and fire, as they so delicately call it in these series as well. And I love the fact that that is not there to pipe up Game of Thrones down the line. That is there to be a tragic downfall of what may happen over the coming years. That, as you said, this is passed down generation to generation, king to king. This is to be carried along in the family. Obviously, we know in Game of Thrones that that's not there. So at some point it goes missing, which is probably the series. And I just think that adds a whole new edge to the series. I'm not going to talk about what I know that's going to happen in future seasons. We know, they're going to go to Stark and we're going to get to Winterfell. They spoke about that today. But it does make me excited knowing that a couple of one-off lines it holds so much weight because of Game of Thrones. And ultimately, this does serve as a prequel series. The opening title is 170 years before Daenerys Targaryen. So, they're not hiding from its past. The series is past, I guess, the future in canon. But I think that's a really important detail, which, again, that caught book readers out, which is amazing that those things can happen. And I think it's also a credit to George R. R. Martin. The final hype of that is that by making it a historical textbook, which is an accountability of events told by maesters generations on, they can change things. We've seen them change things. But it's not like, here's an outrageous change of events. It's this is how this person read it, but now we're actually seeing it in person. And I'd also follow up and say that I'd imagine anything major that could be deemed a change is George R. R. Martin's probably had a conversation with him first to have that, which I think goes a long way, especially when we get to the final scene of season 1.
Exactly. And it's just nice to have, some consistency back in the series. It's very clear that everyone on board knows what's kind of going on, and they've got everyone's got kind of the right idea moving forwards from like the writing perspective all the way down to the actors. And dare I say, that isn't seen any better than, the actors who have time jumps in their storyline. We can give credit to the actors who are able to kind of portray themselves across different eras and be able to continue, like your Matt Smiths, like your Rhys Ifans and stuff like that. But we're going to start with Rhaenyra on Team Blacks. And going from Millie Alcock, who absolutely breakout role, absolutely phenomenal. I know a lot of people were very upset knowing that there would be a time jump in the series and that her reign in the show would come to an end. But she was absolutely fantastic from minute one. Really, really strong young acting performance. Kind of gave that level of naivety that came with being young, but also gave, the strong-headedness that would be needed later on when, she grew up. And you could easily see that kind of transition move forwards when we moved to Emma Darcy as well, that she was able to retain some of that kind of childness that she had back in her, whilst also being able to at least develop her character into a full-fledged woman who would and could rule the Seven Kingdoms. So the consistency in the show, that is down to the writing, but that's also down to the actors and actresses to be able to, review over the previous performances, be able to pick up on smaller details and be able to transfer them across into the next character, even though it's the same person. And I think that's something that this show has done fantastic. It's very unlike Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones never had any major time jumps. You didn't have any major character changes outside of, I guess, the Mountain being one who changed 3 times in his actor. But
the assassin guy, which
yeah,
I can't remember. But at least that made sense because he's got a faceless face or whatever it was.
Exactly. So past that, like the ability to be able to kind of transfer the acting ability from one actress to another, and Emma Darcy's been fantastic in everything she's been in so far. But yeah, really big shout out to Millie Alcock for her performance as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, Rhaenyra as a character. I mean, the way Millie Alcock played it, and then the way that Emma Darcy played it, like you can tell behind the scenes that there was a plan, like going from episode 1 to episode 10, because when those time jumps did happen, it wasn't jarring, and when the actors and actresses changed, it wasn't jarring because they had the same sort of mannerisms going throughout, which is really well done. I mean, yeah, I think Millie Alcock is the main one that sort of was the main sort of focus because she was Queen Rhaenyra or Princess Rhaenyra. But then, yeah, going to Emma Darcy, it was a nice flowing transition, which worked really well.
Yeah, the Millie Alcock's just amazing because there's so many people that got attached to her, which is understandable. She's the face of marketing. She's on the poster. We see her the first 6 episodes, 5 episodes. I can't remember.
I think it was a 5-5 split, wasn't it?
5. Yeah, you're right. 5.
Yeah,
And what's annoyed me is that some people, we don't want Emma Darcy. We want to say it's Millie Alcock. I get that, but they cast Emma Darcy first. They cast Olivia Cook as Alicent first. And then Emily Carey and Millie Alcock came in as those characters because they did it. And if you see the photos of them all together, they all look identical. It's unbelievable casting when you actually take it apart. And I think it's a really smart way to do the series because, it's easy for us that are going to watch it weekly. But when this is finished, it's, let's say, 4 seasons. You're going to have almost like a 5-episode prologue and then the story. And I think long term, I think it's quite an ambitious choice, if I'm being honest. I don't think you could get away with doing that if it wasn't an established series. But at the same time, you can't afford to not have those early part. You couldn't just have it pick up and it's like, here's Viserys who's old and ill. This is his like insane brother. This is his daughter who's kind of in control and his new wife. Like you need to start where it all goes wrong, which is the death of his first wife. The politics of, you must have a melee, you must have multiple children, which is a big thing in Westeros, even to the finale. Ends up why does ultimately they're not getting the Baratheon? Well, she only had 2 kids to wed to someone. They'd already done it in advance. So it's a really interesting thing they did. And I don't want to say falls into the politics of the time because it's a fictional, but there's some realities in how Westeros is in terms of how royal families have operated over the centuries. I'm not going to draw up recent comparisons, but there are certainly a house in power that we can talk about who did have cousins getting together in the 50s who are the offsprings and now run this country. But yes, Rhaenyra, I think she's unbelievable in this, and I'm really excited to see what comes. That final scene. I mean, we joked before we came off. There was a lot of children being born in this series.
Yes,
it was very uncomfortable, which is the way it should be. Like it's easy for us to say like we're 3 guys, and none of us have had that process yet where we've got kids. But there's something in the way they've directed these, which it's not meant to be this faint-hearted, lovely procedure. Like when there's someone essentially being murdered in the first episode, she's going to die anyway, but it's like you got to do this horrific operation to potentially save a son, but it might not save your son, and ultimately didn't. That in episode 1 is where we go. That's setting sort of like we're back in Westeros. This isn't going to be comfortable for us to view at home. This is going to be horrific, and this is the fate that characters are going to have. There's a lot of names I'm still learning. Matt Smith's Damon's first wife in it, the Valerian daughter, an unbelievable death. That he couldn't make the choice. He didn't want to make the choice, and she sacrificed herself to Vhagar and commanded her.
I was going to say he kills his first wife, but
yes, of course he does. Yeah, and another one, in
a very brutal scene as well, which
was incredible in a really disturbing way. And this is it. And there's been birth has been a big part of this series, and I'm going to be blunt. Game of Thrones didn't ever really get that. We didn't get any of the future heirs.
Tower of Joy was barely is genuinely the closest thing that we got. There weren't many kind of babies born during the Game of Thrones, really. There was babies
killed thanks to Joffrey.
A lot of babies killed.
Yeah.
But,
White Walkers as well, and it's one of them where it was a really interesting story choice, and I think it's intentional as a recurring theme that when we get to that finale, we obviously have the stillborn, the premature baby as well, which is the first of her 4 children that she not loses, but she of course loses this one and Lucerys as well. So it's really interesting that it's gone that way, and I feel as if that's a very, very in-your-face direction. And I think for Emma Darcy to act that as well, I think there's a lot going on there. And even Matt Damon, there's been some. Not Matt Damon, sorry. It's because he's called Damon. I keep calling him Matt Damon. It's really annoying. They're criticizing him not going to her, which is understandable when she's in screaming. I know he's on the war calendar. There's some great observations about today's episode, but someone did a really good point saying, well, what if he can't face doing the decision he couldn't do 3-4 episodes ago, which is something I hadn't thought of. And again, this is a show that I don't want to call it intelligent because I hate calling shows intelligent, but this is like prestige TV. It's raising questions to us as the audience. It's opened up for us to make observations and have discussions on. That's why we're here doing it today. And yeah, I just think going back to Rhaenyra, I absolutely love her. And I think for a debut season, the fact that the final shot of today's episode wasn't Lucerys dying, it was her reaction. And I think the showrunner just spoke about the script today. It's basically saying that the final line in the script was basically her turning on a war face or something like that. That yes, you've got the tear of sadness, but that turns to the cameras the old Targaryen madness that we've not had a chance to dive into too much. And it is exciting moving forward. But sorry, I keep talking.
I was going to say it's one of those where she kind of in that final scene she's been holding back, she's been taking the democratic approach. Now suddenly she's like, nah, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, it's basically that they've struck the first blow, which she wasn't willing to do, but now that it's basically like a buddy, like they've started it and that she's gonna finish it.
Yeah,
exactly. So,
and just quickly, last thing on Rhaenyra. Everyone keeps talking about on Twitter. I won't tell you both, but Blood and Cheese is the. If anyone knows about that, that is something that's going to be potentially incredible for the next season. But that's all I'm going to hint at. Read Fire and Blood.
Cool.
But yeah, Tate, you're a big Doctor Who fan.
I am a big Doctor Who fan.
Talk about Matt Smith, a.k.a. Daemon Targaryen, a.k.a. Prince Philip.
Well, I kind of prepared myself for an eviler version of Matt Smith when I watched Last Night in Soho last year. So I was kind of already in that frame of mind of, he can actually play a horrible character, like an inexcusable character. So coming into this series, when I think a lot of people were caught off guard, what? Matt Smith's going to be playing like an evil person? Oh, he's going to be playing Targaryen as well. He's not blonde-haired or anything like that. He transforms into the character. He is vile. He is absolutely brutal. He has some of the best lines of the series, but he's also a very flawed character. That's what I like about the series. They've written all the characters to have deep flaws. Like none of the characters, even as the main protagonist, Rhaenyra lies quite often to her best friend and is what causes kind of, a bit of a quarrel from the very start, like from the first few episodes. There is no clean-cut character in this series. There's no character where you can fully support them and everything that they do and they say. And that's what makes all of the characters so enticing, especially with, Daemon Targaryen, who has the fun lines, is a very brutal warrior, and definitely proves himself on the battlefield, but then is an absolutely horrible, vile person the second you get back into the chambers. And it commits some really bad acts during this kind of this series. And it's Matt Smith. He's a fantastic actor. It's showing that he's got range. We've seen him playing the fun, goofy, lovable kind of like family friend from a fairy tale in his show run as Doctor Who. And now we're seeing him playing this brutal murderer, like rapist, like it's everything. It ticks every single box on kind of the horrible scale. And yet he has this magnetism about his character, which means that you can't take your eyes off him in every single scene he's in. He's just a phenomenal actor. That's all I'm saying. And it absolutely perfectly cast, even if, staring at his IMDb face right now, you're like, how on earth did he play a Targaryen?
Yeah, Daemon as a character, Matt Smith played it brilliantly. Like, any scene that he was in, he was my favorite. I think throughout the whole show, he was my favorite character and my favorite actor in the show. Because he was so menacing when the character needed to be, but he was also not soft, but like when they're in, can't remember where they were, but when they're with his second wife and his kids there, he seems content and he shows that really well. He shows that he's happy not being part of the politics of Westeros, not caring about anything. And then when he's back in and he is back in Westeros and he's married his niece, basically, and he's menacing. I mean, even in the last episode when he grabs Rhaenyra by the throat, you think it's a completely switch, but he plays it really well. It's not jarring. He just plays the character really well when depending on the theme, and it does show his range there.
He's unbelievable. I mean, you know me, I'm not the biggest Doctor Who fan. I didn't enjoy Matt Smith's era as much. I don't think that was Matt Smith's fault. I think that was the writing.
I think rewatching it reflects better than what I remember at the time.
What came after. Yeah, I think following Tennant was not an easy task for anyone. And I think, again, it's how many Doctors in a row have we said that the writing let them down? And that was, I guess, the beginning of that stretch. But for this, I remember, again, when this series was announced, I was like, a Game of Thrones prequel, really? And I'm not going to hide the fact I wasn't hyped for it because a lot of people are going to pretend they were like, oh, yeah, we were buzzing when they weren't. But, you know, I'm happy to own up and say I was wrong about a lot of it. And I was wrong about him. I will say the posters are terrible. The marketing posters are abysmal for this series. The awful poster of his really long wig. And I was like, why is Matt Smith in an awful wig like that playing a Targaryen? And obviously, you know, marketing is different to what the product is. But as the series grew, as you said, he's like the magnetism towards his character that every scene he's in, he steals it. And I think the one, I can't remember episode 2 or 3, where he gets the Raven he gets the messenger from Viserys saying he's going to send in the army. And he's so pissed off, he just ends the war that afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an incredible, because he does not speak at that moment.
Was it? Was it 3 lines that he has in that entire episode, and that entire episode is like,
and all of them are before he gets the Raven as well, I think.
Yeah,
and it is just a physical performance, and as we see him, as we grow with him, that is really funny. My older sister's watching the show at the moment. Side point, she came to Game of Thrones in the summer with a boyfriend. He'd seen it all, she hadn't. I'm not saying, why are you watching Game of Thrones for? But she watched it as an 8-season bubble and said it works a lot better. And it's like, I guess if you did watch his 8-season bubble, it'll be easier to take the ending than probably us watching it weekly across however many years we all did it for, which is a really good thing I want to bring up. But she's like, I'm not a big fan of the incest in this series. I was like, what episode? She goes, episode 7. I was like, okay, I can understand that. But you know, I don't want to say I love the incest, but there's a lot of great memes online at the moment about like how everyone's now okay with incest because of Game of Thrones. But it's one of them that he's just so good in it. And as this one episode, he still can't trust him. Like, if you know what happens at the end of the books, that's great for you to know that. But if you're watching it from a season 1 perspective like us, he's still an unknown quantity. Is he going to make a play for the throne? Is he really backing Rhaenyra? Is he got his own scheme? Because I'm going to say, getting to that finale, when it got to the war, I mean, I love the fact when Otto's in the high tower and he's like, let's just gut these cunts or something like that. And he says something like on the bridge. And I love the fact he's so unhinged. And going back to episode 8 with the incredible Viserys crown moment, I mean, that's come out as being... that was like unscripted, like the crown fell off and Damon picked up, and I just thought, what an unbelievable moment for them to stay in. And I love it when shows and films do this, when they stay in character for those types of things. It goes such a long way in those performances. It shows the actors are invested into the roles, and they just get it. They get the character, they get what they're working with. And I think Damon's the ambiguous one, that he does respect his brother. He clearly does care about the Targaryen dynasty. His family are coming first, which is why he's aligned his goals to them. And I think it's going to be amazing of what we get from moving forward. And I'd argue that we probably have one of the greatest setups for a future battle in Game of Thrones. That Ayman's Damon conversations. If the way that it was episode 8 of the after the speech when Damon just stands in front of them, he just does the smile. And what I love is that Ayman is essentially Damon, though. Like, Ayman is like the Mad Targaryen sides. It goes through their ancestors, but
dare I say, Ayman looks like kind of a cowboy ninja pirate from like an anime.
Yeah, it's like David Bowie and Zoolander ended up on like Game of Thrones. And you just know that when the time comes for them to touch swords, it's going to be a fucking incredible piece of TV whenever that time comes. So yeah, I'm just so excited about Damon. I said I've completely not won it as credits you take for it last night. So I think saying this to me, I wasn't massively a big fan of the film. Matt Smith in it. It was great to see that dirty side of him that I just don't think we've had the chance to see on TV. He's played roles before with Philip in The Crown, and I just think, to me, this was Damon's series, Matt Smith's series, and ignoring Paddy Considine, but again, even when Paddy Considine's dying, Matt Smith in that episode, he's scared, and that's the first time you see him scared because he can't face looking at his own brother. But I love the fact again, he's like, you took away all the Targaryen hordes, you're doing this, that, the other. There's a lot of observations. I think this is going to be a really fun series to rewatch before season 2 comes out.
But dare I say, he has the best kill of the series. I know we could debate the final kill of the series, but the kind of half beheading is absolutely, it caught me so off guard.
That one liner is like, he doesn't need his tongue anymore. Yeah.
It was, and the thing is, you expected something, but not that.
No,
not that.
And it's not shock value for shock value's sake. It is, and I think so. And again, thanks to Twitter, someone spotted. If you see as he's doing the speech, Rhaenyra looks at Daemon and nods her head, which is the sign like you can have him when you want him. Mm-hmm. And I just loved that whole setup. Again, it's just it needed it. And again, Ayman in that scene, absolutely love the fact this bloke's been half beheaded in front of him, even though it's against a family he dislikes.
And he's got a smile on his face.
Dare I say, let's talk about the family that he doesn't really kind of get on with, at least. Well, not really the Greens, but let's talk about
Hightowers.
Well, not the Hightowers. No, we've still got one team.
Valyrians.
Black, the Valyrians.
Yeah,
we'd heard stuff about Valyria all the way throughout Game of Thrones, and this was the first time we've seen any Valyrians realistically on screen, which was quite nice. What was even nicer was the performances both from Eve Best and Steve Toussaint were fantastic. They felt like the only stable couple in the entire realm, which was really nice. They were just really brilliant playing off each other, and both of them had fantastic character moments. I know we're getting a Sea Snake series. I don't know if Steve Toussaint is going to be coming back for that. I don't know whether it's going to be kind of following his War in the Stepstones over the years, but he did such a fantastic job, playing like Corlys throughout the entire series. And Eve Best as Rhaenys, she had her moment. She had her episode 9 moment with the dragon, and chose not to burn them to a crisp, and just chose them to give them a stare down and a warning that do not mess with her. And for a character who'd kind of been from the very start pushed forward as the one who just missed out on the throne, the queen to be, or whatever she's called from the
queen
start
who
of the
never
series,
was.
The queen who never was. To have her kind of sitting and waiting in the shadows, kind of playing the game, watching her children die or pretend to be dead in front of her, only to have that kind of outburst towards the end and kind of that declaration of actual sound need. She doesn't like Rhaenyra at all. She just doesn't, but she knows that she would be the best one for the realm, and that's where allegiances lie. And that's exactly where kind of Team Black stands. It's one of those where she is the declared heir. If you follow Team Blacks, it's because you're following the lead of Viserys before him, or you're just following the laws of the realm as they were set. Whether your allegiances to family are there or not is completely different. And that is exemplified in both of these two's performances throughout the entire series.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, they do seem to have the most solid relationship until you get to episode 9 and 10, where Corlys has been gone for however long, and she's a bit pissed off. Like, he might be dead. But he abandoned them basically. But the fact that when they reunite in episode 10 and they show a strong front together, that they both support Rhaenyra as for her claim for the throne, like, it just shows how, and the fact that the theme sort of, or the mood sort of changes when Corlys announces that he's backing her, because it shows how powerful they are. And like, how important their fleet is, and when they're going through the plans, how military minded he is, like blocking off the shipping routes with his fleet and then laying siege to the Red Keep. It's just something that no one else ever thought of, but it's probably because they didn't have the power to do that, because they were relying on his fleet for that.
Yeah, it's how World War One ended. When the Allies won, that's how they blocked off the fleets and not get the freedoms to Germany. And again, it's George R. R. Martin. He brings a lot of real history into these kind of things, which I think is always a fascinating thing. But I really want to talk about Corlys and Steve Toussaint. Tayte is amazing. He's one of my favorites this series. I really want to quickly talk. Sorry to always bring up the aggro, the racist abuse. Before this series came out, there was so much racist abuse at him. Oh, House Velaryon can't be any black people. This can't be that. They don't exist. Blah 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 blah. Utter nonsense, utter drivel. And what I want to kind of back that up with, and I hope this doesn't come out wrong, it's not my intention, the fact that they're actually black, and obviously have the mixed race son, with the best, of course, being the mother, is the whole subplot of the bastards not looking like Velaryons. That is actually the easiest way to demonstrate that, is by skin color. And it is just, once again, it's the same channels, it's the same people, they're on that pedal. But when this series ends up being a humongous success, breaking viewing records, I think the first 6 episodes went up in viewership every week, which doesn't happen normally. An episode 1 is always only a peak point until the finale. And this was breaking HBO's estimations. And only when it got so big, then the narrative changed. Right, okay, this is why Lord of the Rings is crap compared to House of the Dragon. And it's the same channels, and I want to give credit to Steve to something. He's been calling this out for months, even when the show's been going well. He's still calling out people that were racially abusing him all over the social medias into the series. So that's a big thing for me, because the Velaryons are probably one of the more interesting families, them and the High Towers, that we've never in Game of Thrones. How would you call it? In the Game of Thrones series, we haven't ever been able to see them. The Velaryons, I think they're name dropped in the books, but they are not a high, not a high house. That sounds embarrassing, but this is them at their peak. They are dragon riders. They are with the Targaryens, and it's really interesting to dive into that history, that their working relationship. That Corlys is fine with the bastards because all he cares about is his house name staying strong and being attached to that throne. And I think that's what's been a big thing for me with this series, is that they've nailed those sort of smaller things. And the Eve Best playing Rhaenys as well. I just loved them together. Like when she's there with Corlys, they're just chilling together. You know, they're like the auntie and uncle just bitching about all the pathetic ones. Like they're this like smug duo. And I love the fact that we all know she should have been queen. She knows she should have been queen. And I know Alicent says it in episode 9, but that's what everyone knows, that Viserys was a great man, but he was not a good king. Whereas Rhaenys should have ruled the throne. She would have been the queen. And I love the fact that when she has that moment in episode 9, she doesn't kill them, because it's not her war to start. It's not her war to end. She's very neutral. Even episode 10, she still doesn't bend the knee, which I think is a really important thing.
She's the only one. Yeah. And it is quite an impactful moment as well. Like the fact that she doesn't bend the knee, but she still has the support there. Interesting. Very interesting.
Love them. And also shout out to the son. So this is one of the so many names. In the book they kill him. Well, again, and this is going back to the plot to keep the son alive. I love, because very rarely do we get a happy ending in Game of Thrones. And this is one where faking his death for him to be free, and I think it was Essos or to the east. I can't remember where they said he was off to. I love the fact that's a slight change, because Daemon is pure evil, and some could argue he might want to kill someone. But I don't think it's in his character's nature to have killed someone that innocent who you know, Rhaenyra does get on with, and you get that great conversation between them where, you know, they do like each other. It just never worked. It could never work. And I think that's the core of this series. There's a lot of innocence in playing. It's nice for somebody to get out and you know, have a happier ending than what is owed to them. And at the same time, that's so devastating. You know, we know he survived, but Corlys and Rhaenyra never do. But enough of the Velaryons. Shall we talk some Greens, some villains, the High Towers?
Let's talk Team Green villains. Okay.
Can I do Otto first, really quickly? Only
Go
because
for it.
when this series was announced, listen, Rhys Ifans, I think a lot of people probably know him from Spider-Man. Is it Notting Hill he was in?
I know him
Loads of
from
British
Notting Hill.
stuff. We were shown Kevin and Perry Go Large. When I say we were shown, me and my sisters were bought that film. And I'm not joking. I was 6 years old when I saw Kevin and Perry Go Large. My entire life, Rhys Ifans has been Eyeball Paul, superstar DJ Eyeball Paul. And it doesn't matter what film he is in, all I see is Eyeball Paul. And to have him in Game of Thrones, I think is genuinely, not because he's Eyeball Paul, but I think that's one of the best castings this series has done. Because he is a stage actor, he's a supporting actor, but he is so perfectly built for a period piece, playing that dodgy political role. I love him. I don't think he has as much to do as others will want, but to me, it was like Eyeball Paul is now in Game of Thrones, and I kept dreaming that we might get him, doing a vodka trick, but not in this one. And there's obviously, have you all seen the meme of him rolling the blunt?
Yeah.
Last week he was like rolling a letter, and they said, "Oh, he really is the Hightower." Lots of funny memes. But yeah, sorry, just Otto Hightower, despicable villain, playing the Game of Thrones via his daughter when she's like 13. Using his dead wife's clothes to get her in. A genius in that respect of where his goals lie. I'm very excited about him moving forward.
I love the fact that his immediate nickname was not Littlefinger, but Middlefinger.
Yeah.
Because he was just playing the game in that sense. Like, he's a fantastic actor. Like, I've always enjoyed his performances of various different things. I was surprised that he didn't get more to do in the latest Spider-Man film himself, because he is such an eccentric actor, such a fantastic stage actor as well. So to be able to flex his acting talents on a show where it's like Game of Thrones, where it's all about the script, it's all about kind of the words that you say, and it's all about your execution of it. He is a despicable character. He absolutely is. And he is kind of the cause of a lot of grief that is throughout this entire series. It's very interesting you name them villains, because I am of the essence that, once again, all the characters have massive flaws. If there was one outright villain of this series, absolute outright villain of this series, it would be Otto Hightower. He is the one that everyone can unite against and go, yep, he's a horrible character. Any of the other Greens who are involved in it, you could say, are a product of his destruction. And kind of like, they've got fair points to make in various different things, but the way that they're going about those points are either hypocritical or, they're on the kind of verging on the wrong side to almost malicious. So it's one of those things where, yeah, the Greens make some interesting points, especially about, succession and heirs and, bastardry. However, the way that Otto has twisted kind of his entire house's kind of end game, aiming towards the throne, and really a massive kind of play for power done through his kids and his grandkids, it's completely manipulated the house into kind of that setting where it's very easy to see them as the villains in this show. I mean, as far as Otto is concerned, I think his character, he plays it perfectly to the T, to the part. I really do want to talk about both Emily Carey and Olivia Cooke. Because Emily Carey, I think, from the first few episodes, I didn't really know what to think of her as a character. She was quite quiet and meek and, didn't really have anything to play, was kind of the gentle soul coming out. And then we get through to episodes 4 and 5, and suddenly, out of nowhere, she really flexes her acting chops and really shows her talent in that role. And I think the big scene that she had herself for Emily was like the scene where she walks out into the banquet. She's wearing all green, and it's a very kind of gasp, heinous moment and stuff like that within the courtroom, which is fantastic. And then Olivia Cooke. Olivia Cooke is a phenomenal actress. She is absolutely fantastic in everything that she's in. I'm sure we'll be discussing that coming up soon on our Spielberg retrospective of Ready Player One. But I've absolutely adored her in roles all the way back to Meal and the Dying Girl, which was my favorite film of like 2016, 2017 when it came out. And she was just such a brilliant performer back then. Absolutely blossomed into a fantastic actress and really conveyed that paranoia throughout the entire series that had been building throughout the childhood, and really showed off kind of that, sudden outburst and rage that's been caused from her father's kind of, not mistruths, but kind of exaggerations of the truth, and, pushing her to go towards the throne and pushing her into power when she never really intended to be there. And it shows how out of depth she is in her role. Alicent is a very flawed character to the fact that she's been shoved into that spot, but she never intended to be there. And because of that, she's fighting for the survival of her own family, which she believes is completely under threat because of what's been said, to from her dad, when actually there's barely a threat there at all. If she kind of followed Viserys' advice, the entire family would be hunky-dory and fine with it.
Yeah.
Of course, he wouldn't get the power and wouldn't get the throne, but I don't think that was ever the intention. I think that was always Otto's game, and she was just kind of, she's a queen, sure, but she's also very much a pawn in the game of, the people playing the big shots.
Yeah, I think with just going back to Otto, I think you can trace everything negative that happens in the show back to him.
Yeah.
From the first episode, he's basically pimping out his daughter to the king when she's 13 or 14 or 15, and he's purposely sort of shoving her into that spotlight to become queen, and then he can then play his game. He can basically whisper these dark lies in her ear to the point where it just doesn't break. It does break her, because you can see that she is so out of her depth. In episode 7 or 8, she is so desperate to have people killed and basically sort of be sure in what she's doing and be secure, that she's letting one of the other characters, I can't remember his name, but not have his way with her, but sort of pleasure himself.
Laris.
Yeah, pleasure himself to her feet. Yeah.
Oh God.
And it's so awkward, and she's letting it happen because she doesn't have anyone else to turn to. She realizes that at that point her dad has basically pimped her out and left her on the side of the road, basically. She has no one left to trust apart from him. But even then, he's still got his things that he wants. Everybody wants something from her, but she has nothing more to give. And it's just, Emily Alcock, and she played it really well. I think the standout scene for her is when Ayman loses his eye, and she wants an eye for an eye, basically. And she is so distraught that the king is taking Rhaenyra's side, that she's like, I'm going to have him myself. And she goes for it, and then she's so outraged. Rhaenyra plays that really well, because she says, now everybody sees your true colours. But it's just really well played.
It passes down the line, because that also reflects into the final episode where, Ayman also wants an eye for an eye. And you can see that is the knock-on effect, that one kind of, not bad apple in the family, but one toxic kind of, train of thought in the family can run down through the generations and really pass on.
Alicent, with me and Alicent, I think she's one of the best characters on the show in terms of an actual character. Not saying I agree with her, but I think that the standout moment for me, aside from the knife scene, which is as we get to see, everyone gets to see her literally committing treason, but so it's like, let's do it, guys. I don't think any other king in Westeros would have let that go ahead. But when Viserys dies, and I understand the logic of her reading that prophecy, that she doesn't have the faintest clue what on earth he's on about. But to her, that's her dying words, that he wanted Aegon on the throne. Too many Aegons is the moral of the story.
Don't name your kids after your kids. I mean, we've got Rhaenyra, we've got Rhaenys,
Rhaenyra, Rhaenys,
we've got
Aemond, Aegon. There's another Aegon and another Viserys, which Matt Smith's kids.
Yeah, we got Viserys the king, and then Viserys the young. We've got.
We've also got Joffrey in here as well.
Yeah, we do have a Joffrey in it,
yeah.
And which kind of undermines why Robert Baratheon would have ever named his one of his children after a Targaryen. That's just me putting food for thought. But Alicent in this, there's something. I think it's Olivia Cook. When they announced this show, I mentioned Matt Smith was the big standout. Olivia Cook was the one for me saying this is the actress that's not an A-lister, but she's going to be the one that goes on Game of Thrones and ended up with a massive career. Now, obviously, Ready Player One, big blockbuster film she was in, and the amount of people I've spoke to the last few weeks are like, wait, Olivia Cook, Alison Hightower was in Ready Player One, because they just don't remember the character that much because of the, obviously most of it is, taking place in a computer game. So you don't get to see her for too much of it. But what I jump back to is that she's this desperate character where, because she's been played, she thinks she's playing the Game of Thrones, but she's never really in the game to begin with. That you've got Larys, who is using her for his foot fetish on the side. She's got nothing to give him but her feet. He doesn't need that, but it's him saying, you might be the queen, you might be the queen regent, you might be the king's mother, but here you are with your feet off, getting information from me because you need me to do this. And I think the moment that sells it is after Viserys' death, when they're in the small council, and they're like, well, guys, we've been planning this for a while. Let's get on with it. And she's like, wait, what? You've been planning this for like years? And it's at that moment she realizes that, it doesn't matter what she thought she was doing, how she was playing it. There were always other people ahead of her doing it already. And I think it's such a tragic character that, when we see her when she's younger, I think Emily Carey does a fine job. She doesn't have as much to do, bar the being pimped out stuff. But the one thing I would say the show hasn't done the best job alleviating towards is that, from my understanding, she was meant to fancy Kristen Cole, which is why the relationship stagnates with Rhaenyra when she finds out. Now, I will say I don't think the show did a good job at making that abundantly obvious that she fancied Sir Kristen.
Yeah,
but it also explains. As they got older, you can see it more, but that's something I think that needed to be communicated a little bit more, that she felt betrayed by Rhaenyra in the same way Rhaenyra obviously felt betrayed, but by her going with the father. And I think it's a very fascinating character, and I think, heading into season 2, I can't wait for the conversation she has when Ayman gets home off his dragon, and they find out what happened. That's going to be a conversation. Even her, again, like criticizing all the bastards, then she's happy for her son to go around like raping the handmaidens and stuff like that. Like there's this sense of jealousy that I think she envies Rhaenyra being an actual good mother, whereas Alicent spent all her time trying to be a mother and she's raised terrible children, which maybe it's a fault of her own. I don't know. It's a really fascinating character complex, and I think there's a lot more for her to show over the coming years. And again, I think Olivia Cook casting her will end up being one of the best decisions for the show. And obviously, if anyone's familiar with the Spagliato Prosecco thing that's gone viral recently with Emma Darcy and Olivia Cook, those two are very close. You go on Google the other day, you'd Google their names, it comes up with the drinks. A little bit of viral marketing for Game of Thrones, but I mentioned Sir Kristen. Let's talk about Kristen Cole, because a lot of people are calling her one of the most despicable characters on TV in a long time. I think it's is it Charlie? One of friends, Charlie or Alden, calls him Sir Incel, which I think is a pretty great term. That his despised hatred of Rhaenyra because she rejected him in marriage and fleeing. I love him in this disregarding way that I love a horrific villain in TV and film. Obviously, I don't strive to be one myself, but I like these people that are just so sick, twisted, nil. I have a great time watching them on screen, and it's the kind of character where I'm trying to think if there was ever a comparison to Game of Thrones. I don't want to compare him to Joffrey because he's not as bad as Joffrey, but there's a character that pops up once every few seasons, and you're like, when this guy goes, when it's his turn to die, it's going to be sensational. And you hope they have the most ridiculous, drawn-out, horrific ending for a character, because he's the kind of guy, he can't survive this series of events.
No.
He's played such a mighty part in things getting to how they are, and even killing the poor old bloke, the one person calling out treason, slamming his head into the marble, and the body just left there. I absolutely love it. He's an absolute raging psycho, and I can't wait to find out who's involved whenever. I'm assuming there's going to be a giant war. I'm assuming he's going to end up being like a commander or something. So
I really hope that that Graham McTavish's character is the one who. I mean, I don't know anything about going forwards in the books, but especially because he was the one who kind of not turned coat, but he was the one who basically flipped sides the second that he knew. He'd seen that and he's like, no, you're out of control, awful. He is he's a brilliant commentary within this show on kind of toxic masculinity and like he has one relationship one time, and then suddenly he demands the world from it, and that's not exactly how this world works. And because of that, he becomes an incredibly bitter character. And you can see him kind of turning with that and saying, "Oh, my career's on the line because of what you've done," and stuff like that. When actually, we watch through the entire show, and his career actually almost kind of goes upwards from there. It's not like, an immediate kind of thing. You do feel sorry for him when he's looking to go kill himself, but then you think, well, actually, no, because he just went and killed someone in the Great Hall on his own, and he's somehow still got a job. It's a very, very unusual character, because you think there's going to be a redeeming moment, and then he goes and delves himself deeper and gets himself into a bigger mess of a situation. I do feel it's going to get to the stage where, I mean, even at this point, like, Alicent's starting to go, bro, you were so far out of line. Like, but we'll see where his character goes, but definitely going to end up with a brutal and violent death. And, I don't think anyone is, not looking forward to that moment. I think everyone's going to be like, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, it's him and Otto. Those are the two characters that I can't wait for them to die.
I feel like Otto's going to get a slow death. I feel like Otto's going to be like not like or it could be a completely instant one. It's not going to be as brutal as we hope, I think.
Yeah. I mean, so Christian Cole, though, as a character, like, he has his night with Rhaenyra, and he's basically second best to Rhaenyra anyway, because in that episode, she wanted Daemon. She didn't get Daemon, so she's like, "Oh well, he's here. I'll just take him." And then for him to beat someone to death because he made basically a small joke about their relationship, it's just it's like peak incel, to the point where he's basically killed someone because they're having a joke, and then when he slams that guy's face down onto the marble, the look on his face, he's like, I fucked it here. I've made a mistake. But now he's so deep into it with Alicent. He's so loyal to Alicent.
Also,
I think it's...
I was going to say that kind of behavior is now expected of him now.
Yeah.
Like,
I think, he's so loyal to Alicent. Like, I mean, I think it's, again, due to that sort of incel mentality. Like, she is giving him attention, so he is basically like a puppy dog, just following her around, doing what she wants, and what he thinks she wants. When as a matter of fact, Alicent is like, "Yeah, I don't need all this. You're doing too much now."
No, it's that bang on, and it is going to be a fascinating character moving down the line. Let's talk the kids, because we're going an hour and 10, and we're going to round off with let's talk about the three strong boys first, shall we? A toast to them. R.I.P. Lysares and his poor little dragon bit gone in one bite.
the little dragon that could not.
I'm going to ask you both this as a kind of posed question. So, we obviously didn't get to spend a lot of time with. Is it Harrick Strong? I can't remember. I know it's Strong. The father of them. At the start, I was like, oh, they should have really made this relationship and built it. However, I love the fact that we just assume there was a relationship in those 10 years. That he's designed as a tragic character. That we have 3 scenes of him. One's his death. One's him defending the boys in the courtyard of Sir Kristen. There's him, saying farewell to them. I love the fact we spent such little time with him, because it leaves us with fond memories of this character. And I love the boys are open to him being their father, that they are like wearing it, and they are Rhaenyra's children more so than Sir Strong's children. I like that routine they went with. I know not everybody's enjoyed it. I think George R. R. Martin said he wished more time had been spent with Strong, which I can understand. But when you're doing that time jump, it's one of the relationships you don't have time to continue building for someone that's going to end in such horrific circumstances with the curse of Harrenhal. And I just, I mean, I knew what was going to happen to the series. It was something that I think when we hit episode 7, I was like, how Game of Thrones used to be, right? You'd have the big episode 9, small episode 10, and then you'd have a major episode 2 in the following season. I was like, are we going to get the Stormlands dragon chase in the finale, or are we going to get it in like episode 2 of season 2? And as when Viserys died, I was like, okay, this is going to be like the final scene of season 1. A horrific scene. Just again being bitten in one bite with that sound effect, but I love that it's not. It's to me, it's not a shock. I mean, it's more of me asking you both actually because I knew about this heading into the final episode, but the moment they tee up her saying farewell, she has more time with Luke. Was this something you all saw coming before he was killed? Like, I want to know both of your thoughts actually.
Yes, it was very obvious from the second that kind of they're like, you're going close to King's Landing, you're going up north. The one going up north is obviously safe. The one going near King's Landing is not safe.
Yeah, when you see when he lands and you see Vhagar just chilling there, you're like, oh, okay,
he's dead.
He's gone. Yeah, and it's genuinely sad. Like I was sad when he died, even though we haven't had much with him. It was like he was the youngest kid. Like he didn't deserve to go out like that, but he did.
Yeah,
casualty of war.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and this is it, and I guess he's the stepping stone that's going to kickstart the war. And I don't have much to say on is it not Jaehaerys? That's the king. I'm just going to call him Jake because I think Jace is going to be a big part of season 2. He's gone up to Winterfell. I know that Kragan Stark is going to be the big name they cast for season 2. He's going to have a massive role in this series, so I think everyone's buzzing for the Starks and Winterfell. So again, it goes that Luke stuff and. Kind of what goes with Luke is you have before we get to Aegon, let's talk Ayman, who is just unbelievable. I want to get this over from my head. So I mean, we're all like cinemas, we're all 26. The actor that plays Ayman is like 20. Like he is young and he looks about 30. And I think he's in a show that my parents really enjoy. And I think so is Helena Targaryen actually. What's that fantasy series that's been on Netflix for a few years? The Last Kingdom or something like that. He's in that. But I think we've had him in again 2-3 episodes, but I love the design of Aemon's that I knew about the sapphire eye. So apparently in the book, he only ever wears the eye patch when he's on official events. He always wore the sapphire in his eye. I like the fact they delayed it, that he only shows it when he needs to share it. It's a very cool looking design. I love the fact again his eye got ripped out. But Ayman I'm on the hype train for. Like he's going to probably be one of my favorite if they make him a full villain. A lot of people talking about the change. I don't know if we said it during the start of this video, but in the book it's implied that Ayman went there to kill Luke, nothing else. Whereas obviously in this episode it's a mistake. I think it's actually genius that going back to episode 1 where Viserys says, it's an illusion that we control the dragons. How does Luke die? Well, he can't control his nervous young dragon. It spits fire at Vhagar's face. And Ayman can't control the oldest dragon, I think, in Westeros, who just goes off on a tangent and just kills it for winding him up. It's a really interesting mindset they're going to put forward, I think, for future seasons, that these dragons, they're not just pets. And I'm quite curious to see what else they might do over the coming years, because it sort of not gives the dragons a bit of character, but it just adds another dimension and tension to when these people are riding them. And just that shot of when Luke's flying in the storm and in the lightning above it, Vhagar just sort of hovers over. That is an unbelievable shot. And I think the chase was really well done, as well as they could do a chase with the size difference in that scale. But yeah, Ayman's my favorite of the, he's going to be a villain that everyone loves, isn't he? I think he's going to. If they let him grow, I think everyone's going to love him.
I don't even see him as a villain at this point. He's just a great character. Like whether you like the Greens Blacks argument, whatever. Like we know that Rhaenyra is really the main protagonist of the show, and at least for this stage. But honestly, just the pirate that just sits around in leather clothing and stuff like that, and Gorks in the background. The Free Strong Boys speech as well was absolutely so well delivered. Like Ewan Mitchell, fantastic performance, and easily like kind of my standout from the second half of the season for kind of my favorite character to be introduced, especially in the final few episodes. He got so much to do there and will be a big part. I mean, I know we got Aegon as well, the new king, who's a bit of a wet blanket, but he doesn't want to be king in the first place. And there's a lot of kind of, you could talk about that kind of going into it going forwards, but we've not really given much material with him over this show, other than the fact that he's a rapist and he doesn't want to be king. He just wants to drink all day and sit in the corner. Whereas with Aemond, we have him from being this kind of weak, kind of the run to the litter, being given kind of the pig with wings instead of his dragon, to basically stealing a dragon and then losing an eye for it, and then basically owning that and basically saying, "Do you know what? Fuck the haters. I'm just going to go out as this kind of
the biggest dragon in Westeros as well."
That is a power play. Jesus, that is a move. So welcome to the game, because he's definitely going to be a big part of it, and I genuinely can't wait for him to have his big fight with Daemon, which is definitely going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, Aemond as a character is just so well played. Like, there were some memes when Daemon cut that guy's head off, or in half basically, and you go to that shot of Aemond and he's smiling. There were memes like, "Can you please be my dad?" Because they are basically. Aemond is basically Daemon when he was younger, or from what I can glean anyway. Like, Aemond is one of those characters that is gonna have a massive part. And like when his dragon Vhagar kills the other kid's dragon, and you get that shot of his face, he knows he fucked up, but because he only wanted the eye, but he is now killed. He's basically struck the match that is going to be the war. And when he faces off against Daemon, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, going back to that dinner scene, when Daemon stands in between his family and Aemon, and he gives that look to Aemon, you can probably, from what I thought anyway, you can see that he is considering it, trying to fight Daemon, but then he's like, yeah, probably not, because he's already killed someone. He has already killed someone today, so let's not add to that tally.
They're both the seconds. You think about it. So Aegon believes, he should be king. That's what he's told. That's what they're told. Aegon, you'll be king. Like Daemon, his older brother is the one that would inherit the throne. He knows that it's the second son. He would be better, and it's what he says. I'm the one that's educated. I'm the one that reads the books. When he's with Helena, and he says, I should have wed Helena, my sister. Great theory. I think I said earlier, sorry, that he is the father to Helena's kids. When Viserys dies, he goes in that room. She gives him a look. He gives her a look. Very intrigued to see if that were to play out, if that is just an outright theory, or if that is something that could be true down the line. But there's something there, and the parallels of him and Daemon, I think, is one of the highlights of this first season. That they're and even when they're on the hunt to try and find him, when Sir Kristen's like trying to be posh, and he's like, I was took to this place when I was younger, and there's so much there that I'm really fascinated by, and I can't wait for him. And just a quick thing on Aegon, I know he didn't get too much to do, as we said. He was in Dunkirk, that actor. He was the one, when Mike Rylance is on the boat, he was Mike Rylance's son. Which is great that he's got a few things. I think, is it Tom Glynn-Carney, or I think that's his full name, but he's done a lot of theatre work since then, and I'm very curious about Aegon moving forward. I think he's going to be actor that, as we said, this is, for Rhaenyra and Alicent, they got 5 episodes, the older versions. These kids got like 2 or 3, if that. And I think season 2 onwards is where we're going to get to see them flourish, and they're going to really grow into these characters. And I'm excited for when we get to see that with all of them. And certainly some of the stories are going to be unmissable. But that's going to kind of cover most of the video for today. Before we get into a couple of favorite moments, if we're not spoken about any already, I really want to talk about the soundtrack. I've listened, so they've released the whole thing on Spotify this morning. Now I've been listening to a few tracks they've released every week. They'd let 1 or 2 out. Ramin Djawadi, who to me is important to Game of Thrones as John Williams is to Star Wars. Hans Zimmer to Dune, we could argue at this point. Game of Thrones is his domain as far as I'm concerned. I've not seen Westworld. I've heard a few bits of his Westworld score from playlists, so I listened to it. It sounds like it's kind of like Game of Thrones but modern off the music vibe, but this is his series, this is his world, and I love the fact they brought him back for this, and he is absolutely on fire. He's choosing to sparingly use themes from Game of Thrones. We have the 3 dragons, then he dropped the Daenerys theme, which was a great part of the final episodes. I love the fact he's just not there playing stereotype stuff. And kind of in regards to that, I want to ask you both a question. What do you both think about the theme tune being the Game of Thrones theme? Because this was a big question. Yeah. I'm just going to say it's such an iconic piece of music. Didn't even if they tried anything else, it wouldn't work. So I'm in the mindset. I don't mind it because it is one of the greatest themes ever done in TV, and I still get the buzz when I press play on the episode and it kickstarts. You're in the mindset. So for me, I'm okay with it. I know it's a very interesting conversation that some people think there should have been a new theme, but everyone would just go and put the Game of Thrones theme over the top. It'd still sound better, wouldn't it?
I mean, I like the new intro with the bloodlines and stuff like that flowing down. It did catch me off guard when they played the Game of Thrones theme on episode 2, and I was like, oh, really? They're going back to that? But it's one that, like you said, it's one of those things where it's like, well, would anything else have worked in there? And you're like, well, no, it ties you into the universe. You know exactly what you're getting, and it kind of is that crossover. It's a different type of the show. You're seeing something different on screen, so you know immediately that it is different. So it was one where at the start I was like, really? And then kind of after a few episodes, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm back into it.
Yes. I mean, for me, it was when I started the first episode and the theme started, I was like, it sort of transported me back to Game of Thrones and just realizing just those sorts of, not memories, but things that used to whirl in my mind at that time. Like, no character is safe. It's going to be brutal. There's going to be a lot of, not gore, but like violence and stuff like that. It's going to be gritty. That was sort of kickstarted me, like, in my mind in like the first episode, and then as it carried on, it sort of blended into the background. But I mean, the theme tunes, like or the soundtrack itself, can't fault it really.
No, definitely. And kind of that, I want to favorite. I mean, I want to say favorite episode, but I think I'd go episode 8 if I'm being honest. If it was me,
Same.
If I'm going to go for a favorite moment of the entire first season, I think this has been an astronomically beautiful season. But I think it just has to be Viserys walking. It's the score, it's the performances, it's the importance of him needing to be there at that point. It's built towards it for a few episodes. He needs to come out. He's got to face his illness, and I just think it's the commanding scene. And you know, obviously, I don't want to sit there and be like, "Oh, look, kid getting eaten by dragon ha" or something like that. But it's a great moment. It's the shock value that is Game of Thrones at its core. Even it's the strong burning with his dad in Harrenhal, proper Game of Thrones, sinister. But to me, that'll be, as you said earlier, that's the Emmy in the bag. They're going to play that clip. It'll be the longest Emmy clip they ever play. It's that or Matt Smith killing everyone at the end of episode 3 when he wins the war for himself.
I personally think this is a no-brainer. It's absolutely episode 8 is the best episode, and it's also that scene with Viserys just walking, just striding through with the mask on. It's the first time we've seen the full mask. It's acting as he gets there. It's everything about that entire scene. It's phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal, and it's one of those scenes which will become iconic with this series. It's iconic within Game of Thrones already, just within the universe. And I don't think it can be topped at this moment.
I think same. I mean, it is episode 8. It is him. I mean, even from like where the doors swing open and you see him in his like sort of half dead state, or pretty much dead, with the walking stick, him slowly walking to the throne, because he is still king at that point, and he has to remind people that he is still the king, even in his half dead state. I mean, that scene and the other two scenes that are my favorite are Daemon winning that war basically single-handedly, just cutting through everyone, and Daemon cutting off the head of the Valerian when he calls Rhaenyra a whore, basically. And it's just like, it's so unexpected, and then he's like, I don't think you'll need his tongue, or you can have his tongue now. It's just that one-liner as well, just cements it. But episode 8, that whole scene, just great.
It's like that, the chopping head bit is that classic, it's like theatre, right? It's such a stage type thing, and the pronunciation on that whore and those bars, like, it's so well built up. And again, it's stuff that again, I don't want to diss on Game of Thrones final season too much, but there's just something missing from them. And again, I think it'll always go down to being rushed, cast bigger, actors getting older, moving on, etc., etc. So many things about this final seasons that, heading to my final thoughts. All of our final thoughts on season 1 this, I've loved this, and I'll just say I really miss Game of Thrones. I think this is what the last 10 weeks have done. I miss Game of Thrones. I miss how great it was. I missed it being my favorite show. I don't miss getting up at 2 a.m, but I would love to watch it without it being spoiled for me. 2 episodes it took for me to realize of this show. Oh no, I was like, Twitter's worse than it was 5 years ago, and I was like, it's when the accounts tweet that you don't follow, no one has liked or retweeted them, and they appear. They just appear.
Also the leaks as well, and there was a lot of problems with leaks with this series, with episodes being aired early and things being spoiled. Like I remember going
finale leaking. What a catastrophe! Who would watch a leaked finale? Despicable people. So yeah, sorry. My final thoughts season 1. This is the best TV show of 2022. There's been a lot of good TV. And there's an incredible series running on Disney Plus every Wednesday at the moment. But I'm not gonna lie, 2024. Like, I hope it's spring it returns, because I'm gonna read Fire and Blood, and then I'm gonna do what I couldn't do before. I'm gonna read all of Game of Thrones. I'm gonna plunge into it, and maybe by the time I finish all of them, Winter might come out. Jokes on me. It's been 11 years at this point. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah. You've got no chance of that. But yeah, no, I mean, my final thoughts echo yours. It's the best show this year, and it's just been absolutely phenomenal. Like, there's nothing more I can say. Like, I've already given this show enough praise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm exactly the same. I mean, the only other thing that I was watching weekly was She-Hulk, but that was sort of a slog. Like, there'd be times where I'd be like, okay, I have to watch She-Hulk this week. With House of Dragons, it was the exact opposite. It was like, I can't wait till... Well, I used to watch on Monday evening. So Monday evening, I just can't wait. It was a highlight of my week. I would finish watching the episode and then watch the preview for the next episode straight after on YouTube. It was just... Yeah, Mondays were the highlight of my week. And now I don't know what I'm going to fill it with.
Yeah. No, it is exactly, and it is those great lulls. That's the problem with TV, isn't it? You got to wait for that next one. And I guess what we can say moving forward, although we didn't have a date, we've sort of spoken about it before. We couldn't do season 1 weekly spoiler discussions, so we did for Game of Thrones. Whenever season 2 comes out, that will go back to the way it used to be. It's been ahead of a few months, and obviously we don't know when that's going to be. But Game of Thrones isn't going to go away. Maybe there'll be more spin-offs between now and then. Who knows? If I was HBO, I'd just focus on this for the time being. Just go all out on the House of Dragon. Do another series after then.
This and Succession. You can focus on those 2 shows.
Oh yeah, sorry. What I meant HBO is in terms of their Game of Thrones. Like, I'd rather if
they could just put out this show and Succession and just rotate it every other year. Then
there is a Succession trailer came out today. And, it comes out in spring, so that'll be one. I cannot wait for that. But we want to hear from everybody at home. So if you have been watching, please do comment your thoughts on House of the Dragon season 1. If you've been able to see the finale, we know not everyone can see these episodes as soon as they air. I was speaking to Carl the other day, who's waiting for it to finish, and I think other people that have waited, if they've been able to avoid spoilers and if they're waiting for it to finish, I think they'll have a really fun time with the season 1. And I do hope people get the chance to. So please do, again, comment your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. If you're into TV, we've got Andor discussions coming every Wednesday. We've had a Rings of Power spoiler discussion from a few weeks ago. There's a lot of TV happening. I feel like there's something big coming out as a TV show I've forgotten about. I know you mentioned Succession. Ted Lasso is going to come back next year. We do a lot of TV. We've done a lot of TV this year. But we don't just do TV, of course. We do films. And when we've got films to review, we've got a heck of a week coming up. We've got the BFG coming tomorrow. Not everyone's a cup of tea. But we are at that point in the Steven Spielberg retrospective. That's going to come up at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. Oh, God, we've got All Quiet on the Western Front, like quite late on Thursday. Yeah. I need to see it still. I've heard incredible things about it. So there's a lot of new releases. And when we have new releases, it's best to find us on our social medias, because that's where we announce stuff. And Tate, what are those?
So go find us on Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy. Go find us on Facebook and Letterboxd. Just type in Cinema Savvy. You will find us there. And go on to Redbubble. Help support the channel with that. And also, once again, subscribe. We're trying to get to 2,500 subscribers by the end of the year. That's our next goal. We're getting really close to it. So, share the videos, share the channel to your friends, start a discussion.
Definitely. So everybody, please do that. Ayman, once again, thank you for jumping on. I know you were on Black Adam last night. This was a much better video because it wasn't me just getting abused by The Rock for an hour. But it's been great to get you on. It's been great to talk Game of Thrones, House of Dragon. As I said, season 1 spoiler discussion is now done and dusted. I'm going to plug Castle Rock again. It's a great podcast if you really want Game of Thrones weekly between now and then. Whenever season 2 comes out, subscribe to them. They're an unbelievable podcast with some really great people. So that is going to do it for this video. Thank you all for watching, for taking time out to join us. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.